This government is once again putting out social media posts and fully scripted blog posts which, in my personal view, are not only misleading but in part downright deceitful. And unless somebody, such as me, points at the specific wording and challenges it and tells you what that really means, many people may be deceived by it. So if you like that kind of brutal approach, please do subscribe to the channel. If you're new to me, I'm Daniel Shansmith, a barrister of England and Wales, and it is literally my job to look at wording and claims that are made and look for inconsistencies and look at what these things really mean. So today, of course, there's a barrage of propaganda regarding the VAT on school fees, because this post here, and this is from the Treasury, this says end to tax breaks for private schools. Now, I've talked about tax breaks before and what they really are, and the exemption for VAT on education is not a tax break. A tax break is where you get a deduction or a different band of tax for various reasons, if you fit into certain categories, etc. So these are not tax breaks. As quite rightly pointed out by Alexander Stafford here, the VAT exemption on education is across the entire sector. There is no VAT on any education, whether that is from nurseries, schools, further education, higher education. Even the EU requires this on all education across the sector. And this is not only going to have a negative impact on the private sector, but it will also have a negative impact on the state sector because of the influx of thousands of children coming into the state sector, where in many areas there are no spaces. And those are some of the claims that I will challenge here in some of these posts, but we're not even off this main post just yet. Because what they say here, aside from the claim that this is an end to a tax break, which is, as I said, is not entirely accurate because it is not a tax break. Aside from that, they try to claim that this will be a positive thing because they will recruit 6,500 new teachers. Now, aside from all of the difficulties and the reality of actually recruiting those teachers, all that aside, and of course with the caveat that I support the recruiting of new teachers and adequate numbers of teachers in both the private and the state sector, aside from those caveats, 6,500 new teachers across the number of schools around the UK is not going to have the sizable difference that they seem to claim that it will. Why do I say that? Well, because even if they are successful in recruiting 6,500 teachers, which is a fairly lofty goal, they'll be distributed across 29,158 schools across the UK. Throughout England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And that doesn't include nurseries, so even if they do recruit those 6,500 teachers, it is not going to have a material difference across the entire sector. But there is more that I would like to directly challenge from this blog post here. They say, does this mean private school fees will go up by 20%? Because of course VAT is 20%. They say, we don't expect that raising VAT will cause private school fees to go up by 20%. So what this is, they want the general public to read this and believe, oh, so VAT of 20% added to private school fees does not mean that private school fees will go up by 20%. That is what they want you to believe. It's there in black and white, absolutely crystal clear. They want you to believe that fees will not go up by 20%. Well, I've been sent various sets of fees from various people. And I can tell you that although the schools are trying to shave off the VAT where they can, i.e. books and food and things like that, but the vast majority of the costs and everything else will attract VAT. So taking one example directly from a school bill that I've seen, let's say for year 10, the fees for the term are in the region of £6,000. They've managed to separate out a few £100 worth of books and lunches and things like that they don't have to charge VAT on. So the vast majority of the rest they have to charge VAT on. So that comes to around 19%. So it's technically correct in that they didn't have to pass on the full 20%, but 19% might as well be 20%, let's face it. But then they say, on average, we predict the measures are likely to see rises by around 10%. I just don't think that will be the case. But they say here, and this is a really odd statement to make, the bit in red highlight, This is because private schools, like other businesses, don't have to reflect the VAT increase in the amount fee payers are charged. In other words, they say they don't have to pass on this cost. Now, picture for a moment, if you will. Imagine you are working from home and you have a limited company and the limited company pays you, so you are just you providing services to customers, and so you are earning money in that way. Okay, so now let's say you're earning £30,000. You bring in £30,000 from the products or the services that you provide to your customers. Let's say you've got business rates relief because you're working from home, and now let's apply some of these budget changes, and the changes as they would apply to the private schools now apply to you. So not only do you have the national insurance increase for employers because your limited company now has to pay that even though it's paying you as an employee of the company, you of course have to pay your personal income tax and national insurance, but your company now has to pay a higher rate of national insurance because it employs you. Let's say now that you lose the business rates relief from working from home, so you have to pay more for that. But now, after considering all of that, let's take that £30,000 once again. So that's been chipped away already. But even before you chip away any of that money that comes to you ultimately in the end, that £30,000 you now have to pay VAT on. So that's 20%. So that's £6,000 straight away in VAT gone. Obviously, if that £30,000 is then inclusive of VAT and you don't pass that on to customers, then you'd have to reduce your income to £25,000. So you'd have to reduce the cost of all your goods and services to £25,000, because then £25,000 added VAT would then be £30,000, because that's the total amount of money coming in. So what they're essentially saying is you have to either pass it on or reduce your fees. So that just doesn't make sense. You've got all of those other costs to take into account afterwards, but even before all of that, because this is the way VAT works, if your money comes in, it is VATable. If it is a VATable service or a product, you pay VAT on it. That's how it works. Before any other deductions, you take off that VAT. Now, many years ago, I said that bank accounts that are associated to companies that are VAT registered or individuals that are VAT registered should have a principle in that account that immediately separates off VAT, because you can't spend it. You're an unpaid tax collector for the VAT office, and I'm not against tax in general. Everything has to work in a certain way, and that includes VAT and so on. But in certain sectors, it is exempt. So imagine now that they applied that policy to self-employed tradesperson working through their own little limited company. Imagine they said, well, you've got a choice. You don't have to pass that on to customers. You can swallow that cost yourself. That is precisely what they are saying to private schools that are providing this education to children. Now, I read in some of the comments, they're not charities. Well, they literally are charities in many cases. They are not-for-profit charitable entities that are solely set up for the purpose of providing education to children. What kind of a nation will add VAT, a value-added tax, which is supposed to be for luxury goods and services and so on, apply that to education? I personally think that is abhorrent. But such as it is, that's where we are. But we can also challenge this wording here. It says here, evidence from the IFS shows that raising VAT on private schools will have limited impact on the state school sector. Well, I beg to differ, because it is now out that Surrey Council, via a Freedom of Information request, has confirmed that for Surrey and Woking, there are no places available in years 9, 10 and 11. And so without being able to provide places for the, I think it's between 2,000 and 3,000 children that need to find a place, without being able to provide a space for those children, those local authorities will be in breach of their statutory duty to ensure that there is sufficient schooling for those areas. So if there are children looking for schools in Surrey and Woking and they cannot do so, though that local authority is in breach of its statutory duty. Now, if all that wasn't bad enough, many people may not realise that there is no VAT on gambling. Now, of course, some people will point out in the comment section that there are other taxes and stuff associated to gambling, but by the by. Now, interestingly, one of the reasons that there is no tax on gambling is because they say that there's no skill involved. However skillful you might think you are at gambling, there's no real skill involved in gambling, therefore there's no tax on it. But the gambling industry, according to Statista, is £15 billion. So, in theory, if they were to apply VAT to gambling, Just as I'm not suggesting they do, by the way, before I get shot down in the comments, but in theory, if they applied VAT to gambling, this would raise almost double the amount that they claim that they're going to make from taxing the private school sector. So not only do I think this is all abhorrent, but I think that the way that they are doing it is outright deceitful, in my personal view. They say that they are going to help the state education with 6,500 teachers. Not only I think is that going to be difficult to achieve, but even if they do, split thinly across 29-some thousand schools is not going to make a material difference. But it's also not a tax break. They also claim that the fees won't go up by 20%. I can categorically tell you that they are going up in many places by 19-odd%, which might as well be 20%. I've seen it with my own eyes. And also they say that they don't have to pass this on to customers like any other business. Well, as in the example that I've just outlined with you, not having to pass it on is just not an option. How many of you could take 20% of your gross income before any other deductions, take 20% off before you start paying for other things? Many businesses would just not be able to do that. And so I think this is flat out wrong and misleading. But those are my thoughts. I like to call these things out. Yes, that's an Americanism, as someone rightly pointed out in the comment, but whatever. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.